assume everybody can hear me. So as usual, we're going to use chesslang for the positions. I'll be using the ask feature pretty liberally to ask you guys to figure out various moves. And for communication, we can use Zoom chat. I have Zoom chat open. So for all questions, and when I ask you guys questions, you can use the Zoom chat to communicate as we've usually done. So the topic today is calculation. And obviously calculation is a very interesting topic. It's a very complicated topic. I could talk about calculation for 6 hours. Unfortunately, I only have 1 hour. So I want to try to pick out a couple of very important principles related to calculation, try to help you guys see it from my perspective and give you guys sort of a Grandmaster's take into what calculation in chess entails and how to get better at calculation, what kind of skills that involves, and so forth. So before we get into the actual positions, and the position that's in front of you is obviously very easy. I know that position is very easy. Trust me, that's just going to be a warm-up position. I want to start with a broader question. Let's start by figuring out what calculation is. What does it mean to calculate? What is chess calculation? So in the Zoom chat, I want a couple of you to give me what you think calculation is. Like what does it mean to calculate variations? What is the aim here? So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to think about that and then Zoom chat me some ideas. It's a hard question. It's actually not so easy to even understand what calculation is, although we all kind of know what it is. But I want to hear a couple of ideas. So not seeing anything yet. I'll give you guys a minute. Okay, so Redeema says, it means to think of a series of moves and visualize the moves on the board. Sriram says, finding 4 to 5 moves. And that's kind of what I'm getting from a lot of people. It's like, it's all about seeing as far as you can into the future without actually playing the moves. But what calculation is really about is obviously figuring out what your opponent is going to do and what you're going to do and what would happen if you do various things. But you have to figure all of that out without making any moves on the board, because that's illegal. If you make a move on the board, you have to make it. So the hard part of calculation is contained in the visualization aspect. You have to see into the future 6, 7, 8 moves. And in order to do that well, you have to first and foremost be very, very patient. And I think, to be completely honest, that's one of the things I'm going to try to get across to you guys today is a lot of you guys are very good at visualizing and calculating 7, 8 moves, but you're not very patient. And in order to calculate well, you have to have the patience to consider all of your opponent's possible candidate moves. And you have to have the patience to ask yourself, what if I'm not thinking about this position in the way that I should be thinking about it? And what if that leads me to find other candidate moves? So you have to have this patience to keep asking yourself questions and to keep doubting yourself and to keep looking at other moves in the position. What you can't do is look at a position and say, I figured everything out in 2 seconds. This is how I'm going to play, because where that leads is a lot of blunders, and that leads you to not be a better calculator. And, you know, that just leads you into stagnation. So one of the things I'm really going to get at today is trying to build a little bit of patience in you guys and getting you to really appreciate the richness of certain positions and how hard it is to generate certain ideas. So as an entry point, we're going to take a very, very simple position. And in this position, it's a pawn endgame. It's white to move. Your first task is to evaluate this position. Who is going to win with best play from both sides? And again, you can Zoom chat evaluations. Do you think white's going to win? Do you think black's going to win? Do you think it's going to be a draw? If both sides play perfectly, how should the game end? I'll give you guys a second to think about that. Okay, some of you are saying white will win. Some of you are saying black will win. It seems like most people are saying white will win. So somebody who thinks that white's going to win, how do you think white's going to win? Who would like to volunteer and actually spell out the variation you think is going to happen by voice? And I see a couple of hand raises. Okay, Raunak Ramasan, go ahead. And I think if we could unmute Raunak. And you could perhaps spell out the variation you think is going to happen. I'm not hearing anybody yet. Raunak, are you muted or? All right. I guess Raunak is muted. But it seems like most people who think that white's going to win are saying that white should play king anywhere here. So let's say king c5. And black's going to play, let's say, king g5. And now white has a very, very important move. And there's a move that's very good here. There's a move that's very bad. The very bad move is to play king d5. And this move actually loses because of king f4. And what is the situation called? Anybody? The situation is called Zugzwang. This is Zugzwang. Zugzwang means that you have no move that doesn't damage your position. So white wants to not move his king, but he can't. We have to move our king. And that means black's going to take the pawn and then move the king and promote. All right. So that's what Zugzwang is. So let's say we're calculating. Let's say we know nothing about pawn endgames. All right. So if this variation happens, we lose. So we're thinking about this and saying, wait a second. What if in this position, it was actually black to move, right? Rather than it being white to move, what if it's black to move? Well, if it's black to move, guess what? Black would be the one in Zugzwang, right? Are you guys following my logic? Black would be in Zugzwang. And so going back to this position, we now have to try to engineer a situation where we have the same position, but it's going to be black to move. And a lot of you guys know how to do that. How do you do that? What do we need to do here to make it so that it's black to move in that position? And I'm actually going to use the ask feature here because it's a very, very important idea and a very important technique in pawn endgames. So I know that most of you know this, so I'm only going to give you a minute. But I would like everybody to indicate what white should do in this position. All right, go ahead, please, and please take your time. Twenty more seconds. I think essentially everybody got it. Okay. I think essentially everybody got it. So as everybody's indicating, you start by playing king d6. You attack the pawn from this side. And if black says king f4, then we've tricked black. And now it's black to move, black loses. King has to move, king takes d6. King steps aside and the pawn promotes, right? But what if I were to tell you that black actually has a draw here? If black is very smart about this and does not fall in white's trap, black is still able to make a draw in this position. Well, a lot of you thought that white is winning in the initial position, so this should come as a surprise to you. And this is exactly what I'm saying. In chess, you have to keep your mind open, and you have to have the patience to realize that there are certain things about the position which maybe you didn't appreciate in the first 10 seconds of looking at it, right? So now that I've told you black is a draw, I want everybody to figure out how black should adapt to the situation in order to make a draw here, because black is going to lose this pawn, right? That's a given. Black is going to lose this pawn. So how should black manage the loss of this pawn in order to make a draw in this endgame? Again, I'm going to use the ask feature here. This is a slightly harder question. And this question requires some knowledge of pawn endgames and how theoretical endgames like this work, but I think you guys can all get this pretty quickly. So I'll give you guys a minute. Black to play. Okay, so the vast majority of you got it. Brijesh, would you like to explain how black should go about making the draw here? And if we could unmute Brijesh. And I'm going to flip the board, because there's only one path to take here. Brijesh, are you able to unmute? Okay, I think we're having trouble with the unmuting, but could we allow unmuting? Let me try to unmute you. There we go. I can hear you. Oh, I could hear. Okay, Brijesh, go ahead.
Sir, the move is king f6.
Okay.
So
What's white going to do?
white is going to play k d5. K f7, we can't play k f7 because after k e5, k d7, k f6, that is opposition. So after k into e5, we play k e7. If you place k d4 or k f5, k d5, k d7. For example, k d5, k d7, e5, k e7, e6, k e8, k d6, k d8, e7.
Yeah, stalemate.
K8, K6, it's a stalemate. So king of 6, the one.
Yeah, same thing symmetrically.
Yes.
Very good. Very, very, very well explained. Thank you. And you guys should all be familiar with this pawn endgame. I mean, in general, you have to know king and pawn endgames, because if you don't know king and pawn endgames, then you're going to get into one of these positions and you're not going to know what to do. And that's kind of crappy, because if you did know what to do and you were playing black here, you would easily be able to make a draw. So that's just a side point. Obviously, that's not the topic of today's lecture, but just as a side note, you guys should all, if you have a coach, if you have the means to do it, you have to learn basic king and pawn endgames to be able to know how to play in such positions. But the bottom line is you have to play king f7 and not king e7, because that steps into the opposition. King f7, king e5, king e7, and black keeps the opposition. This is a draw. So back to the initial position. We had to figure all of that out from this position without making any moves. And even in such a basic seeming position, what I'm trying to tell you guys, even in such a simple looking position, what could possibly be complicated here? There's actually quite a lot of stuff that you have to factor in when you're thinking about it. And that presumably takes you a couple of minutes. I could make the position a lot more complicated, and then there's going to be a lot more stuff that you have to keep track of. And the more pieces you got on the board, the harder it becomes to calculate longer variations. And the more important it becomes to be very, very patient and to be very methodical in how you're searching for the best move. So let me give you guys an example. Let's add a couple more pieces to the board. Let's choose a slightly more complicated position. Okay, we have an endgame. It's white to play in this position. And there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on in this position. Now, what's going on? Well, white's got a rook. It's hanging. Black's up a knight. There's tons of stuff going on the queen side. How do we make any sense of this position? Well, first of all, you have to get a handle for how the position works. Like, wait a second. Why can't I just take the rook? Okay, well, if you take the rook, what's going to happen? Well, probably the knight's going to take back, right? And what is white probably going to do here? And we can use the Zoom chat. What would you do here if you were white? Not a hard question. Yeah, probably king takes a7. What would you do here if you were black? What do you think black's best move in this position is? And that's a little bit more complicated, because here you have to have an understanding of what black is aiming for. Very good. I'm impressed. You guys all said the correct move. King takes c6. Knight c7 maybe keeps the draw, but is a lot worse, because white plays king b7, and black is in some difficulty here because the knight has to move, and then the pawn starts promoting. So you guys all understand that black is aiming for a draw here. So after king c6, king takes a, king b5, the game ends in a draw. Okay, so that's one way that the game could go. But let's say that we're playing white and we say, I can draw easily here, but let's say I'm playing for more. Let's say I want to try to find ways to actually win this game. Well, what seem to be white's other tries in this position? What's an obvious try that's not rook takes a8? Are there any other obvious candidate moves? Yeah, there's one other obvious candidate move, which everybody should be naming, and that's a takes b6. Okay, some of you guys are saying king b7, but why would you play king b7 and allow black to take the rook if you could just take it yourself? Like king b7 is just like the other line, except white is down a couple tempi. So white, I guess white's going to make a draw here, and king takes c6 and king takes a7, but you wouldn't want to go king b7. If you're going king b7, you might as well take black's rook, right? So the move we have to evaluate is a takes b6. Well, let's try to figure out what's going on here. Well, probably black is going to take the rook. And now, are there any moves that appeal to you guys here? Anything tempting that white could do here? Yeah, so white could try two things in particular that seem pretty tempting. The move c7 looks tempting, but it's actually just really bad after rook takes b6. The move b7 doesn't do anything after king c6. So really, there's two moves to consider here. One is king takes a7, and one is pawn takes a7. Well, the move pawn takes a7 is pretty easy to evaluate. This just leads to a draw because white's going to get the king into b7, and black is going to have to give up his rook for white's two pawns. You guys are following that. Like, for example, rook a8, king b7, rook takes a7, king a7, king c6 draw. The move king takes a7 is a little bit harder to evaluate, but it also ends in a draw. And black could make a very easy draw with what move? What's the easiest way for black to make a draw here? It's not rook takes b6. Be very careful here. You got to be careful in an endgame. It's king takes c6, king takes b8, king takes b6 draw. So we seem to be arriving at the conclusion that white can make a draw in various ways. But part of what makes grandmasters and people who are good at calculation is that they don't stop there. They don't just look at the obvious moves. They look at crazy moves and they ask this question, how maybe this crazy move is just crazy, but I want to consider it for just a second. What if this crazy move leads to some insane position where actually white's going to be winning? And you guys know the word creativity, right? That's a quality of a lot of chess players, is that they're creative. And I think all that creativity is, and I can tell you that as a creative player, I think my playing style is very creative. I like to think of interesting ideas. You know, I like to sacrifice pieces, as many of you guys saw my game against Wesley from Aim Chess, and you guys know that I love sacrifices. I love crazy moves. And how do I find those moves? Well, I find those moves by looking for them. I find those moves by asking myself, well, what if this move actually works? And boom, one time out of 20, the move actually works. And that's the spirit you have to have when you're considering a lot of these positions. Okay? And that's the spirit you have to have when you're considering this position. White actually has a win here, but it's really hidden. It's hard to see. I think you guys can find it though. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to think about it. But I'd like you guys to take this very seriously. I'm going to make this worth 15 points. And I'm going to give you guys a solid 3.5 minutes to think about it. Please do not rush into a solution. Enjoy the process. White to play and win. But try to use the advice that I've just given you about thinking outside the box and looking at moves that may seem insane and going down the path of those moves. I see a couple of you are already getting it. Very good. Those of you who get it quickly, you have a minute just to break. So be patient. Okay, one more minute. I see a lot of you are getting it. Just be patient. Just let everybody get a chance. Okay, I think the vast majority of you have gotten it, so I'm gonna cut this a little bit short. Who would like to explain the solution to me? Redeema, go ahead. I think you got it and you offered a good explanation. In Zoom chat, you can explain it over voice. Go ahead, please. And Redeema,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so the move is c7. It may look crazy, but then after king takes c7, they're forced. Then king takes c7, then you do a takes b6 check.
Okay, thank you for your rook.
And if king takes b8, then you do b7 because then it traps the rook and you get a draw.
Is it just a draw? Are you sure it's just a draw, Redeema? What is black gonna do here?
Oh wait, no. It's actually a win for white, but then it's Zugzwang, and if king c7 and king c7, b takes a8, win.
Just kidding. Yeah, we're not gonna make a knight. We're gonna make a queen, and we are winning. Very good. Well explained. Tejas had a question. So Tejas is asking, why not rook b7 check here? Tejas, I'm not sure why you're into this move, because here I just go king c6, and in fact, white has to be careful here. You probably should take the pawn right now, because if you take b6, I'm going to take b6, and white actually loses. So Tejas, if this explanation makes sense, then if this doesn't make sense, then you can add a follow-up question. But you have to go down this path. Very well explained, Redeema. The move c7 looks insane. Why are you giving up this pawn? It looks terrible. It looks like white wants to lose. But if you actually go down the path, you see that white is winning in the end, because that's just the way that chess works. Chess is just a crazy game. And you get these insane positions that are winning with a single pawn, and you don't know why they're winning. They just are. And in order to unlock that brilliance, you have to keep your mind open to that kind of stuff. And if you don't keep your mind open to that kind of stuff, you're just always going to you're not going to go deep into various positions. You're only going to scratch the surface of certain positions. And you don't want to be like that. You want to be, you want to be a thoughtful player. You want to be someone who gets better. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is keep your mind open for crazy looking options. Here's the second thing that I want to talk about, which is that you guys are very good at spotting, obvious moves, and you guys are quick at solving tactics. But the problem is sometimes you spot an obvious move, right? So you're thinking, what if I go there and my opponent goes there? And you go down a certain path and then you think, oh, that's easy. I'm just totally winning there. But what really good players do is, rather than just accepting, yeah, I'm winning if I go down this path, they really look as hard for their opponents as they do for themselves. So rather than just quickly saying, yeah, I'm going to go for this line because I think it's totally winning, you spend some time actually looking for resources by your opponent and really making sure if the line you're settling on doesn't fall victim to some sort of hidden resource, if that makes sense. So let's try to practice that with a position that I think is a really, really cool position, because it really illustrates the importance of thinking deeply. It's a really cool position because it looks simple, but it's actually very, very complicated. I think you guys will enjoy this position. So it's white to move. The first move is extremely obvious. It's the move everybody should want to play. Okay, you guys can just spam this move in chat. What should white do? Yeah, absolutely. Rook c7. That is, you absolutely should play this move. Black's queen has only one retreat, right? Queen d8. This is where the hard part starts, because you're looking at this position. Everybody should be seeing this. You're like, man, I have a discovery here. Where could my rook go? Well, the rook actually has a couple of places it could go, right? It could go to b7 and go to g7. Maybe you don't want to move the rook at all. But when you have something as promising as a potential discovery, you should absolutely start by looking at various rook moves. You guys are familiar with the advice, checks, captures, threats, right? Do you guys know what I'm talking about when I say that? Like, you have to start by looking at checks, captures, and threats. That just means start with the most promising aspect of your position and see where that takes you. Well, queen h6 should be one of your candidate moves, but that's going a little bit far. But queen h6 you should definitely keep in mind at some point as a hint. So let's start by examining possible rook moves. And let's see if we can find a very promising path that white can go on, which actually seems to win the game on the spot. And I'm going to use the ask feature here. Well, actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to give you guys like a minute to think about it. I want to see who can find a pathway that seems like it results essentially in checkmate. A couple of you have already found it, which is pretty impressive. And you could just type it into the Zoom chat. Okay, I'm going to go to Puru. Puru, you're saying that you know, so I'm going to call you on it. Would you like to explain white's most promising path? And go ahead, Puru, you can unmute yourself. I'm not hearing you yet. Would anybody like to explain the most promising path? I mean, I guess I could just spell it out. It's fine. You guys will have something more interesting to think about. So many of you are indicating it. The first move is rook takes g7. And obviously that's the move you should start with because it's a capture and it takes a bishop. And after queen takes b6, this is the important part because your rook is hanging. There's also a pin here, but the move queen h6 looks incredibly promising because it creates a mate threat and it's not hard to establish. And after queen takes d4, check king h1, black has no defense against checkmate. There's just no way to solve the problem of queen h7. But this is where the question of patience comes in. If you're impatient, you just think that's all there is to the position. I'm going to go rook takes g7. But if you're patient and you're creative, you look at this position, you say, wait a second, what if black has some crazy defense that I'm not thinking about because I'm too impatient? And let me look very deeply. Let me try to find something here. And then if you ask yourself that, you actually find something. Black actually has a defense in this position, which is pretty crazy, but he does. And let's find it. I'm going to give you guys a minute because you guys have been very impressive and fast. So I'll give you guys a minute here and input the solution. Black to play and try not to get mated on the next move or in the next two moves. Okay, some of you got it. Actually, quite a few of you got it. The first move is knight takes f3 check, okay? Everybody should see this because it's the only other check other than queen takes d4. Now, white's not going to be dumb. White's not just going to be, oh, thank you for the knight. Oh, wait a second. Then queen takes d4 and then queen takes g7. So you guys all saw that. White's going to be smarter than that. White's going to go king h1. But here black has the brilliant move knight g5. Knight g5 is a really awesome move because it defends the h7 pawn. Knights are just great pieces. Like, can you imagine that the knight on e5 is going to be the hero that's going to be saving the black king? And yet that's what happens. Knight takes f3, king h1, knight g5. And now we get a really complicated situation. So again, let's try to figure out what's going on. Well, black's knight is defending h7. This pawn on h7, what is it? What would we call this pawn? What is it? What is this pawn? A word that starts with a W. It's a weakness, right? It's a huge weakness because if it falls, black is checkmated. So immediately in your mind, you should be like, well, what's defending that pawn? Oh, it's the knight. Well, I should try to get rid of the knight. But if you follow that line of thinking, you might arrive at the move h4, which quite frankly is just a very, very bad move. Why is h4 bad? Because obviously black plays queen takes d4 and he attacks the rook, and we are not in time to eliminate the knight. We can eliminate the knight, and now we don't have anything to capture on h7 with, right? So we have to alter. We have the right idea, but we don't have the right execution. You have to have the patience and say, well, is there a different way to distract black's knight? Everybody should see this alternate way. What am I talking about? What move am I talking about? And so far, this line has been forced, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Like, this has been an entirely forced line. Knight f3. So now, again, it's an interesting situation. Black can take the knight with a rook. Okay. But then white's just going to be up in exchange, right? White's going to be up in exchange, and we're still going to be attacking. Everything is awesome. Well, obviously, black can't take the knight with a knight. Is there anything that black could do? Well, you might look at this and say, looks like there's nothing black can do. In fact, there is something that black can do. Black actually has another defense. And I want you guys to find it. It's just one move, right? It's just one move that is a hidden defense in this position for black. Let's see if you guys can figure out what this is in 30 seconds. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds. Okay, so a couple of you got it. I was not paying very careful attention. The move is rook f7. All of a sudden, look at this knight. This knight is doing everything. It's like, all right, I'm defending h7. I'm also protecting f7. This knight is like somehow keeping black's entire position together. But now the party is really beginning, because if white makes this trade, then white's not going to have anything to attack with. So if you guys look at this position intuitively, if you're trying to continue attacking with white, what move has to be considered? I mean, and white doesn't have much that he can do other than this. Well, h4 doesn't make much sense. You're already attacking this knight in like 10 different ways. We don't need to attack it again. Yeah, knight takes g5, because the knight and the queen are a very good attacker, but of course that involves giving up the rook. And now we get an interesting situation. We have the knight and the queen, they're attacking. Now black's rook is defending. Previously, if you remember, white's rook was attacking, black's knight was defending. Now white's knight is attacking and black's rook is defending. Unfortunately, the knight and the queen are not capable of doing anything immediately, right? If you look at knight h7, well, does this do anything? No, rook h7, white has no attackers. So in many parts of an attack, you have to have the patience to say, all right, I have no immediate ways to generate tactics. I have to bring other pieces into the attack. That has to be a snap instinct for you guys. Like, I don't have enough pieces. I got to bring more pieces in. So white's next move is a very simple move, but it's also a move that demands, that shows that you understand how attacks work. What move am I talking about? Yeah. So many of you are suggesting, I'm not going to use the ask feature. This is too obvious. Rook F1. Let's get this boy into the party. Let's get the rook active. And black doesn't have much that he can do. The move in the game was queen c7, which is just as good as any other move. And finally, white has attacked enough and brought enough pieces in where finally there is a winning combination in this position. And this should be pretty easy for you guys because, you know, you do a lot of tactics on chess.com. This is just like any other tactic. This is the easy part. This is like once you've done all of the hard stuff, now you get to have the fun and you get to find kind of a cool sequence. Okay, white to play and win. I want to see everybody solve this pretty quickly. Maybe it's not as easy as I've made it out to be. Okay, I don't mean to pretend it's like super easy, but you guys should get it. Ask yourself, why did we bring that rook in? What is the role of the rook on f1? What is it going to be doing? Okay. So quite a few of you got it, but maybe it was harder than I thought this would be. The move is knight takes h7, right? Now we can take on h7. And if rook h7, then that's why the rook was involved, because now we have rook f8, rook takes f8, queen takes f8, checkmate, right? And that's why you have to look at captures on every move, because, okay, before the rook was involved in the attack, knight takes h7 failed, but the situation has changed, right? You guys have to understand this. Like, just because a move doesn't work in one position doesn't mean that you can stop looking at that move in other positions, because stuff might have happened. You brought pieces into the attack. Your opponent took, you know, your opponent's queen was formerly in the defense, but now is, you know, elsewhere. So some sacrifice now works. You have to check this stuff every move. And this is a very common source of blunders. Just because knight h7 didn't work on one move, people forget that now it can work on another move. But of course, there was nothing that black could have done about this, because if black had tried to get the queen to the 8th rank, then of course white would have played knight f7 check, rook f7, and now there is actually no defense to queen takes h7. So does that make sense? How you have to check for this stuff on every move? Rook f1, queen c7, knight h7. In the game, black played rook eg8. I didn't give this move in the chess laying. Knight f8 check, rook h7, and now knight takes g6 check. Boom, boom. And here black resigned. In fact, the game is not exactly over. White is only up a pawn, and white is a crushing attack here. Rook f8 is a massive threat. But it's clear that white has essentially succeeded. But let's follow this combination from the start. This was a 10-move combination that was pretty serious. It starts off very simple. Rook c7, obvious move. It all seems very easy, but then you start looking for resources. You find this. Okay, that's interesting. Then you find knight f3. Then you find rook f7. You got to keep finding stuff for both sides, move after move after move. And that's what calculation is. It's this ability to keep looking for stuff, even when you're lazy and you don't feel like it. You got to sit there and you got to grind and you got to look for alternatives and look for candidate moves. And the moment you stop working hard at the board is the moment that you get lazy and that you miss stuff, right? That's the secret of good players. Is part of it is that they just work harder at the board. I look at more candidate moves. You know, I ask myself if a particular crazy move might actually work, and I don't stop calculating when I feel like it. I keep calculating and keep calculating, and I think just as hard for my opponent as I do for myself. So let's put that into practice. You guys might be wondering, all right, well, show me one of this guy's games. I want to see how he does it. So this is a game that I played years ago. This was like 2008. before most of you were born. And okay, so this is not the right position to start from. In this position, I was playing white. My opponent was about 2200. And he played queen g7. And this sets off a really interesting chain of events. I think you guys will enjoy the way that this game unfolded, because there's a lot of tempting moves here, and you have to throw out a lot of possible candidate moves. So as we've done all throughout today, let's start by figuring out just what's going on here. What is white's most obvious move? What is the move that you should start by considering? Well, you guys are saying rook takes h7. I don't think rook takes h7 is the most obvious move. What if you were like rated 600, what would be the most tempting move for a beginner? What would a beginner do here? Imagine that you guys are a beginner. What would somebody who's new to chess want to do? Well, they just want to take the queen, right? People who are new to chess just want to trade pieces, right? Think of yourself when you were just starting to play chess. One of the things that I always wanted to trade pieces. So what happens if white trades on g7? Well, if white takes on g7, probably black plays rook takes g7. And how would you evaluate this position? Is anybody better here? Who's better? Or is it just unclear? What do you guys think? So some of you are saying unclear. Yeah, so I would say that white is better, but white is not winning. Now, white has 2 pieces for a rook, which is pretty good for 2 pieces. Black has a pawn. White's pieces are very nicely placed. Like my knight could go out to f5, but not immediately. This would not be a good idea, because then you would allow the rook to the second rank. So eventually, maybe the knight could get to f5. So white should probably play, what should white play here? White should probably play something patient, like king e2. And then maybe bring the rook into the game. And, you know, white's better. Eventually, you can get the knight involved. So what I'm claiming, why am I even talking about this? Because I don't think any of you guys seriously considered taking the queen. I think you guys went straight into looking at rook takes h7. But you have to consider the simple moves, right? Because sometimes none of the fancy tactics are going to work. And that means you just have to go for the simple option. And sometimes you have to do that, right? So I want you guys to understand that even though you like solving these chess.com puzzles and they're always cool and they have sacrifices, there are plenty of situations where none of the cool stuff works and you just got to trade queens, or you just got to do something simple. So don't assume that just because I'm showing you these positions, you should be looking for something insane on every move, or something insane in every position. Sometimes you have to go simple. In this particular instance, yes, there was something very, very cool that happened, and I did have a really cool resource. Obviously, we should start by evaluating rook takes h7. Does this move work? This move does not work. Why? Who can explain that to me? And I won't use the ask feature. I'm just going to let you guys think about this for a second. And then I want somebody to walk me through the variations here. Because it does look, it does look like it works if you calculate superficially. But it doesn't. Why? What happens in this line? Okay, who would like to? Okay, a couple of you are raising your hand. Let's go with Nishant. Nishant, would you like to volunteer an explanation of these lines? What happens here? And you can unmute and talk.
After this move, king can take h7. And then queen h4 won't work because black can block it with queen h6, and queen can't take g3 because rook is still protecting.
Got it. But does white have any other resources here in this position? Look carefully at all of white's pieces. Do you see anything?
He can move knight f5.
Yeah, but that's not a very good idea, is it?
Yeah.
Because why? Why is knight f5 bad here?
Or else queen can take h4.
Yeah, and you've sacked a rook and, you know, black's just winning. But as many of you are indicating, white does have a resource here. If you look at this bishop, the bishop is, you always have to understand when one of your pieces is lined up with your opponent's king, that's a potential for a discovery. So you can play e5. And at first, and thank you, Nishant, for that explanation, at first e5 seems to win. Because if black steps into g7, then knight f5 is a fork. And in fact, this is essentially just checkmate. You don't even have to take the queen. You can just go to e7 and give mate. But it's actually not winning. And black can play actually quite a simple move, rook g6. And because you've sacrificed so many pieces, the attack fails. You can take the rook, but then black's going to take back. And, well, what are we going to have at the end of the day? Well, white's just going to be down in exchange, right? It's not hard to determine that the attack has failed. White is just down in exchange and all lies. Okay, you could also play e5 here. I hope most of you guys saw that. And e5 almost works. What should black do in this position? What should black do here? e5 comes very close to working. Rook g6. Black does not play king h8 because of queen h4, and this is mate. Black plays rook g6. And now queen h4 again leads to the same situation of queen h6. So unfortunately, rook takes h7 doesn't work. But many of you are already thinking about ways to modify that idea. And one of the ways that you can modify ideas is by changing up the move order. So let's say an idea involves two moves, right? Rook takes h7 and e5. Well, one question you could always ask yourself is, what if I play the second move first? What if I start with e5? Well, that leads to a pretty wide range of interesting complications. Because, first of all, black could take the queen. So you're essentially offering a queen trade. But you're offering it on your own terms. So now white's threatening checkmate in the endgame. And black has a very hard time defending against it. And in fact, black has no defense against rook takes h7. The best that black can probably do, what would you do if you were black here? What's the best that black can do here? What's the most resilient defense? And black is losing here, so nothing actually saves the day. But what's the most resilient defense? It's not rook g7, guys. Rook g7 just gives up a whole rook. Don't give up a whole rook. Rook f8. Sriram got it. And Brijesh got it. Rook f8. So you can make a space for your king without giving up the rook. But here, white goes knight d5, and the knight is coming to e7, so black is still losing. Okay, so clearly taking the queen is bad. If black takes the knight, then black gets checkmated because now the bishop is involved in the game. But black actually has a third resource, which my opponent played. And I saw that move. I understood that it was a possibility, and many of you are indicating it. The move is rook f8. At first, rook f8 doesn't seem to be dangerous because what does white do here? Yeah, rook takes h7. But if you keep calculating, which is something that I've been urging you to do all day, is just not to stop just because you feel like a position is, certain or something is obvious. If you keep calculating king g8, rook takes g7 check, rook takes g7. And now we get a pretty interesting situation where a pair of rooks has been traded. And probably white can win by doing, what's the simplest way that white could simplify the position here? How do you demystify this position? What is white's simplest path? Well, queen e6 would be nice, Jay, but it's pinned. I would love to play queen e6 here. I think the simplest is just to take the rook and then to take on d6. But this is not so simple because here, perhaps black can walk the king to d7 and black will have some drawing chances. It turns out that white has a very pretty win here, which I was able to find. And I'm gonna use the ask feature here. It's not just the first move you have to see. The first move, I think a lot of you guys are already seeing. But the follow-up, I think, is really, really nice. And I'm going to input the solution. I'm actually going to, yeah, okay. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes since we don't have a lot of time left. Take your time. White to play. Probably have time for one more position after this. All right. 50 more seconds, folks. Yeah, a lot of you got it. Okay, I think the ask thing has gotten frozen. Let me refresh. There we go. Okay. So, okay, maybe this was not as complicated as I was making out to be, but I think it's very nice. Bishop b3 checks c4, and now boom, knight takes c4. You sack like the last piece you have. And if b takes c4, you break through the chain of pawns. Bishop takes c4, you knock the king out, and then you take the rook. Or if black plays rook f7, I mean, here you can just walk your king out of the pin. By the way, this is a really cool situation where you've got two pins, but you have the better pin, so you can walk your king out of one of the pins, and then the queen is free to go. So I don't know. I think all of this stuff is kind of cool. So in the game, my opponent played rook takes f6. 1 second, guys. Sorry, I have to just give me a moment. Okay. So knight takes c4, rook f6, ef6, rook h7, knight e5 check, and my opponent played king f8, knight g6 check, and he resigned after f7. He should have resigned a little bit earlier than that, but he resigned here. Rook f7, because obviously white's just up a knight, and so I was able to win this game. But how was I able to win it? I wasn't able to win it just by looking at the position. I think you guys might have this view of grandmasters that they just look at positions, and I'm like, oh, this is the right move, right? That's this image like Wesley So or Magnus Carlsen looks at it, or I look at a position and I'm just like, yeah, this is the right move. And I'm gonna, and I figured all this out in 2 seconds. That's not what happens. What happens is, just like you, I sit at the board and I think about candidate moves. And I'm just as clueless about what I should do. It's just that I work really hard and I look at crazy moves and I really try to squeeze out all the juices of the position. And I think that a lot of you guys look at a position and you say, this is definitely what I need to do. And I'm not even going to think about anything else because I'm so confident that this is the best move. If you guys take away one thing out of the class today, it's that you should be a little bit more open-minded in how you approach positions, because oftentimes they're going to be a lot more complicated than you think they are. And the more in tune with that complication you can be, the better you're going to become, because then you're going to spot more details. And when you spot more details, you become better at tactics, you become better at calculating and all of that stuff. So we've got just a couple of minutes, and not enough for anything super complicated, but I'm just going to give you guys one more position to round off the class, which I think nicely encapsulates this concept of really challenging yourself to look at stuff beyond the surface. So it's this position with white to move. Obviously, it looks like white is winning very easily with just the most obvious move in the position, but in fact, he's not. And in order to figure out the win, you really have to have the patience to understand why the obvious move doesn't work. And then you have to look at the position in a new way and figure out new approaches to dealing with it. I think it's quite a beautiful position. Yeah, quite a few of you are getting it. One more minute, guys. Okay, so I love that a lot of you guys are actually really patient, and I can see that you're putting in a lot of effort, which I appreciate. Yeah, there's a lot of tempting moves here which aren't right. All right, so because we just have another minute, I'm gonna pause here. So what's the most obvious move? Well, the most obvious move is just to make another queen. But has anybody figured out why making a queen is actually not winning? This is a really weird situation. You don't get this often. But black actually has perpetual here. Black has perpetual here. It's not like anything super insane. It's just queen g6 check. And you guys can trust me. I can talk about this longer, but white's king is just not able to escape the checks. The queen keeps pursuing a diagonal. So you can't promote. You can make a knight, but if you make a knight, the king just walks back to a7 and white has no follow-up. Queen and knight against queen is a draw. So instead, as many of you saw, you have to sacrifice the first queen, queen a5 check. And if black moves the king aside, then white promotes with check. And if black takes the queen, white could even make a rook here. You could really be cool with making a rook and going rook b8 and taking black's queen. So obviously there's a lot more I could be talking about, but I guess the takeaway from today is just that chess is a very complicated game. There's a lot to appreciate. There's a lot to think about. Try to be patient. Try to appreciate the detail. Try to look for stuff in the position that your opponent's not going to see. And that often involves not thinking that you know everything within 10 seconds of looking at a position. Look at it a little bit longer. Try to take everything in. Take in all of the hidden tactics. Try to calculate further than you otherwise would have. Push yourself. Push yourself to go further than you thought you could. And I think that will make you a much better calculator in conjunction with a routine that consists of solving a lot of problems, which I know you guys all do anyway. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your effort. This is a really fun class. I'll see you guys. This coming month. I think I'm doing another class. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe, folks. And thanks for attending. I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye, everybody.